Doing well.
Really excited for this one. It was absolutely epic. Excited to get some of the people that you interviewed on the space as well.
Yeah, very happy to be here. Very happy to be here. So we've got Allah and we've got Noor here, which is great. Um,
All right.
and we've got
I just invited Noor up.
perfect. And then we have Allah here, Allah Mansour. He was a great help in writing the article as well.
All right. I just invited Allah up. Welcome up to the stage, Noor.
Hello,
Hi
everyone.
guys, pleasure to be here. How are you?
And just give me a second to see if anyone else is here. Hold on.
So while Alex is checking up on the remainder of our guests, just a quick little introduction. We will be talking about Alex's article he dropped last Thursday, titled "Can Bitcoin Be Palestine's Currency of Freedom?" In the article, Alex goes through kind of the history around, how Palestine and the West Bank got to where it is right now, and what the financial situation is like. And then he, interviews several people and discusses, what Bitcoin means and how it's being used currently in Palestine. So really excited for this conversation. And again, Alex, thank you so much for doing this research and doing this digging. Absolutely fantastic series so far on Bitcoin Magazine. I recommend everyone who, hasn't read any of Alex's pieces or hasn't read all of them to go to Bitcoin Magazine, go to Alex Gladstein's author page, and just dive in. Just so much, you uncover so much history in your research, and I feel like every single time I learn something new about, how fiat has carved the way that the world works today.
Thanks so much for hosting this space. This is great. So I also think we could invite Arabic Hodl up here. He also helped out a little bit, maybe has some things to say, but otherwise we'll get started. And if other folks arrive who who are supposed to be speaking, just obviously let the host know. So look, I wanted to do this piece for a long time, but I don't know. It was sort of like, it was kind of a intimidating topic, to say the least. Obviously, people feel very strongly about this topic. It's very emotional for a lot of people for different reasons, and it becomes very divisive, and it kind of puts people up against each other. Which is unfortunate. So I wanted to try and explore the topic through the lens of currency, because I think that's a fair way to explore this topic. I think that what I've tried to lay out in the article are, for the most part, facts that I have collected, data and facts, and put them with personal stories, which are real people who I spoke to, who obviously have their own perspectives and biases, but I wanted to tell their stories alongside a series of facts about money and currency and financial and economic control. And I wanted to do this after exploring a few other parts of the world, which include the West African countries that still use the French currency, which include people who live under broken fiat currencies in places like Sudan, and alongside other research I'm currently doing on Cuba, which will be my next piece, which actually has a lot of similarities in some ways to the Palestinian issue with money. And look, at the end of the day, you get some big global parallels where there are people, many millions, hundreds of millions of people living in situations where, like, they don't really have control over their money at a personal level or at a national level. And that's certainly the case for Palestinians. So what was interesting about doing this research is that I knew that things were rough in the West Bank and Gaza when it came to the economy. I knew that they were not good. I had no idea how bad they were until I did the research and talked to people and poured a lot of time into it. I wanted to be open-minded about it, put kind of any preconceptions I had aside. And I was just really shocked at what I found here, obviously, if you dig enough. And kind of the most depressing part is that, you had this very straightforward history of military occupation between 1967 and 1993 or 4, right? Where straightforwardly the Israeli government was occupying the West Bank and Gaza, and East Jerusalem. Okay, so like this is just a fact. No one disputes it. It was just straight up military occupation. But the thing is, the Oslo process, which is known by sort of the Oslo Accords, happened in the early 90s, gave birth to the Palestinian Authority, turned the PLO essentially from a revolutionary group into a political organization, allowed foreign donors or enabled foreign donors to actually start giving to the Palestinian causes because they didn't want to give through Israel before, obviously. Unfortunately, what you realize, though, is that the Oslo Accords, which are kind of like famous for being like a peace deal, or they have like a positive connotation historically, what you kind of realize when you dig through it is that the Oslo Accords were like a way for the Israelis, with the help of the PA, to kind of continue to control the Palestinian people, economically and financially, monetarily, but while kind of giving up this like political autonomy, like by basically saying, hey, you guys can be independent, but like we're still going to control everything about the money. And that's what you start to learn when you look at the Paris Protocol, which is like one of the documents that's within the Oslo Accords, which relates to money and finance. And essentially, you can make an argument that like one of the reasons that the Israeli government decided to do this process, which of course they Arafat, the former PLO leader, former PLO, and two Israeli leaders won the Nobel Peace Prize for this. What you realize is that they probably did this knowing that at least they still controlled the money. At least they still controlled the way that all the money flowed in to the Palestinian territories and then out, right? They were still going to control all of the aid. At least they were still going to control all of the imports, all the exports. At least they were still going to control the regime in that way, like, how much taxes are being paid at this point, what goods are going to make it in. They controlled all this stuff. They controlled the currency itself. Obviously, the shekel is like the dominant currency in the West Bank, Gaza, etc. So I think that's kind of the depressing part, is you realize that like this process, which most people around the world think was like really positive and like was helpful, in reality just sort of increased Palestinian dependence on the outside world, on the Israeli economy and on foreign aid, and actually reduced its ability to be independent. I think that's the biggest takeaway I had, was that in reality, the Oslo process, the Oslo Accords, are kind of a betrayal. I mean, like you had the PA and Arafat sacrifice any hope at economic sovereignty and building up an economy with manufacturing base and agriculture and industrialization. These were sacrificed through the Oslo Accords for essentially this sort of surface level political autonomy. So that's kind of that was the biggest takeaway for me. But yeah, I mean, CK, maybe we can get Allah or Noor's take on this at this point. I think that'd be interesting.
Yeah, who wants to add their 2 cents first? Noor, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. I mean, it's Alex is absolutely right. In many cases, a lot of the focus of the conversation around the Palestinian-Israeli issue is that it always surrounds the narrative. Oh, but we did Oslo, and Oslo was supposed to help, right? And we always go back to Oslo, but the fact that the Paris Agreement was kind of hidden within the Oslo Agreement, many people miss it, and it's really, really missing from the conversation today. And fundamentally, if we are going to even envision a sovereign nation, a sovereign country, it has to start with the economy. And it has to start with giving people the right to transact even with each other in different cities and around the world. Without it, there's very little that could be done to move forward with this situation. And I think one of the things that was sort of mentioned in the article is around the some of the activism that is done today, and it is about time to start thinking about a different approach to this problem, and positioning Bitcoin as a potential tool for that is really liberating in a lot of ways, because it does give the Palestinian people access to one of the biggest networks that will help them break their isolation from the world and connect even with people across the border from them, right? Like they're connecting with people in the West in the West Bank to East Jerusalem and Gaza, which in of itself something that is pretty much impossible to do at the moment. I don't know if Ala, you wanna add something to that.
And really quick before Ala jumps in, Noor, can you, and I should have asked you this sooner, can you kind of briefly introduce yourself and kind of give your background in relation to this specific topic?
Sure. I'm a Palestinian originally living in the diaspora. Both my parents are Palestinian. They left, my father left in 48, and my mom left a little bit before that. Yeah, I'm currently living in the West. I've been a pleb for a while now, and that's pretty much what brought me into this topic specifically.
And just to provide color quickly before Ala, just if you read the article, you will see that in no uncertain terms after the Oslo process in the early 90s did the Palestinian economy basically actually shrink. Like things got worse. So not only did they get worse during military occupation in terms of percentage of the economy that was productive or sovereign, right? Like percentage of people who were farming or starting businesses or owning businesses, you know, the percentages of these people and of the economy that was like, let's say, sovereign or independent, you know, dramatically declined through the military occupation, through the Intifada, through the early 90s. That's like immutable, especially in Gaza. But after Oslo, it became even worse, arguably. So the problem here in the big picture is that Palestinians became very dependent on the outside world, both for work, because basically any goods that they could make, Israelis would basically subsidize their own goods and provide them cheaper, and they flooded the Palestinian market so that Palestinians were like very reliant on Israeli stuff, and jobs. So like the Palestinians had to go to Israel to work because they could get higher wages. Of course you're gonna go work in Israel if you can put more food on the table for your family. So you had this situation where like even before Oslo, Palestinians were very reliant on Israel and on the external world. Okay, they could not themselves industrially, and that was like a designed policy by the Israeli government. And then after Oslo, you had foreign aid come in, and you know, dependence on the outside world merely increased. The problem was that after the year 2000, after the second Intifada, the Israeli government essentially started a series of, and maybe you want to say defensively, of course, okay, a series of restrictions on Palestinian economic activity. So like a lot of Palestinians that were working in Israel, you know, could no longer go. And there were like fewer avenues for trade and like they became restricted. So when you have a society that's dependent on the outside world and then you start to restrict their ability to be interactive with the outside world, that's a recipe for disaster. And that's what happened. So like the Palestinian economy in the early 2000s crashed worse per capita than the Great Depression in the United States of America in the 30s, because the workers, especially in Gaza, who had been working in Israel, could no longer go, or they were heavily restricted from going. And then, you know, over the years, Gaza just continued to get worse and worse and worse. And you had basically, you've had a blockade essentially since 2007. They're ruled by a, you know, Islamist police state sort of dictatorship like Hamas. Like the you know, the average 15-year-old Gazan has seen like 4 wars in their life. So not only are you like heavily reliant on the outside world, but your pathways to the outside world have been cut off or restricted, and then you're just getting bombed. Like your infrastructure is getting destroyed. So there's just like very, very little hope for people in Gaza. You know, things are comparatively better in the West Bank, but still, you know, there's no real hope for independence. So the question, you know, the idea I was pursuing in this article is like, so what do we do, right? So what do people do? Like nothing that has been tried works. Like whether it was armed resistance or peaceful resistance or diplomacy or boycotts, or I mean, none of this stuff has worked. Like the quality of life is decreasing for Palestinians, not increasing. And I touch on that because that seems counterintuitive, because you're like, wait a second, but they both use the shekel. Well, not so fast, because when you have goods in Tel Aviv coming in let's say you have a computer for like $1,500 in Tel Aviv. If you want to sell the same computer in Ramallah, like there's like in the West Bank, there's a process through which that computer has to be stored, where there's storage costs, and then it has to be moved into the West Bank. There's transport costs, and then a lot of them get stolen along the way. And by the time the merchant sells the computer in Ramallah, it's like 2 to 3 times as much. So you've actually had dramatic inflation in the Palestinian territories, despite the fact that they use the same currency as the Israelis, which is very important to understand. So, you know, nothing really has worked, I guess is my point. So I wanted to talk to Palestinians who were using Bitcoin as a way out, as a way to connect to the outside world freely without, you know, checkpoints and controls and restrictions, as a way to have financial autonomy and independence. A very important part of the Paris Protocol was that Palestinians would not have their own currency, and that, you know, they'd have to use the Israeli currency, and that any change in this would require like a decision from a body called the JEC, which basically fell into Israeli control and really disuse, like it hasn't met in a long time. So you know, what is on the horizon for Palestinians? Oh, well, maybe the World Bank will work with the Israelis and the Americans to make a like a CBDC for the for the Palestinian Authority to roll out. I mean, that would be a disaster, because like one of the main things that's so important about the Palestinian economy is the informal sector. Like Palestinians do have refuge in cash. Like they could still transact and save outside of government control to some extent through cash. This cash is very important to Palestinians, right? So if you're talking about getting rid of cash and replacing it with like some sort of like confiscatable, freezable, controllable digital asset that the PA and Israel will have control over, I mean, you're talking about extinguishing the very little freedom they have left. So I think it's very timely and important to have this conversation now. It's amazing to hear the stories of Palestinians using Bitcoin in this kind of very defiant way. And it really seems like a peaceful protest. So I don't know, Allah, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what you've seen.
By the
I think
way,
that would be helpful if you can just come off
Yes,
mute.
yeah, Fadi's here as well, if you guys want to bring him up.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ala. A little background myself. So I'm a Palestinian. I'm 31 years old. I have lived in Palestine for 25 years. So let's say that I was Intifada, 2000 Intifada. So I don't know where to start, but I'll try. So the thing is that before 2000, when I was a little kid, I remember that everything was more open. There were less checkpoints. People can go freely from one side to other. Of course, we are using shekel, so it's the Israeli currency, which I only knew. So when the Intifada started, the Israeli has destroyed our infrastructure in Palestine, West Bank, because goods were cheaper in West Bank, and a lot of Israelis were coming to Palestinian side to buy goods, and that was not good for them. And we were mostly farmers, and we were producing a lot of fruits and vegetables, and we were exporting them, of course. Of course, there is Oslo Accord and Paris Protocol, which give share to Israeli, and we control what we can import and what we can export. But yeah, I think that the Intifada is also as an economic target to make Palestinians more dependent on the Israeli side. So yeah, we are used to be workers in Israel because wages are higher, so people put more food on their table for their families, and the situation is getting more and more worse because of the targeting of the infrastructure in Palestinian side. So we have to find jobs, we have to work to get money. So the only way, not the only way, but the most profitable way for a lot of people is to work in Israel. So after that, I can say when I was in Palestine, of course, I was working in Palestine and I was an activist. I was searching to use any way possible to get my people the freedom, because we are under occupation, of course. So all the world gave us the right to defend ourselves and to resist in any way possible, even if it's a direct conflict or more, I don't know how to say it, more peaceful way to protest. But it's really hard because a lot of Israeli goods now are very competitive in West Bank because of the price and because of the quality. It's the same point that the infrastructure is very bad in Palestine, and we have a lot of electricity cut off, especially in Gaza. So it's really hard to produce goods or be competitive, and at the same time pay the wages and pay everything. And if you want to import, for example, the materials for producing, it will cost you a lot because, like you said, Alex, before, when you import, you don't have a direct contact with the world, so you have to assign people in Israel in Israeli ports to make the taxation and make the clearance taxation for you, and you have to pay them. You have to pay Israel, and for every day that the goods are in the port, you have to pay a lot of money also. So yeah, it's really bad. Now I'm in Italy. So, for example, if I want to send money for my family, I imagine a lot of people do the same. The only way apart from Bitcoin is Western Union. But the problem is Western Union is only available in 2 banks in Palestine. And there's a lot of controls. So, like, if you send money, they know you are sending, who is sending money and to whom. And you have to send money only for people who is blood relative. You can't send, for example, to friends or to other people. There's a lot of controls from the Palestinian Authority and from Israel also. And the amount has to be, if I remember correctly, 1,500 JD. So let's say $1,700, I think. So yeah, if you send more than that, they may be confiscated, or even they will call you to an interrogation, the Palestinian Authority, and to tell you from where you got this and why you are sending this, etc. So yeah, Bitcoin can help us a lot because there is no third party, there is no authority, and we can be less dependent on the Israeli side. And yeah, I think it's very important for us as Palestinian. The point is, there's a lot of Palestinians with a smartphone. I think 70% of Palestinians have access to smartphone and have access to internet. So I think there's a good base for us to adapt Bitcoin more freely. But the problem is that the Palestinian Authority and Hamas in Gaza are the only profitable from the money transfers, and they are profitable if they ban Bitcoin from transactions because matter of fact, the reality is the exchanges in Palestine, in West Bank, can't deal with Bitcoin. There's a rule from the Palestinian Monetary Ministry, which is, we don't have really a currency, but it's called like this. So they told all banks do not treat with Bitcoin and prohibit Bitcoin, and also the shops of exchange where you can exchange money do not trade with Bitcoin. So people, let's say, can't use Bitcoin a lot, if we say, or normal people don't have access or can't or don't know how to do it, or with who can exchange, or what to buy, or how to use it. Because, for example, if you have a shop in Palestine, West Bank, or in Gaza, you can't say, I accept Bitcoin, because the Palestinian Authority will get after you, because they are profitable from controlling the money because of Paris Accord and Oslo Accord. So, yeah, the only victim is the Palestinian people, not the authority, not the Israel, of course.
Alaa, could we so that's a great segue to Fadi, who's joined us. So I spoke to Fadi because Fadi is a anti-corruption activist, and he's been looking into the activities of the PA over his career. And I think we need to realize that, the struggle is both with the fact that there's this like occupying power, but then there's also this highly corrupt local government.
All right, Bitcoiners, I want to tell you about our newest sponsor. This show is brought to you by Ledn.io. I have been super, super impressed with the guys over at Ledn. I've actually known the co-founders, Adam and Mauricio, for a very long time. I've had the pleasure to watch them build Ledn up from a tiny, tiny startup to now a super impressive institutional grade Bitcoin and crypto lender. Y'all, I'm so impressed with these guys. They are offering some of the best rates out there. I don't think anyone even comes close to touching them. You can get 6.1% APY on your first 2 Bitcoin that you deposit into Ledn interest accounts, and you can get 8.5% US on USDC deposits. I mean, I know all the competitors. They're not even close. If you're going to put your crypto and your Bitcoin into an interest account, Ledn is by far the best. And on top of that, like I said, these guys are hardcore Bitcoiners, and they know the products and the services that Bitcoiners want and appreciate. They come up with B2X. It allows you to put your Bitcoin in, they leverage it up, and you can, with one click of the mouse, get twice the exposure to Bitcoin. So if you're super bullish, Ledn has you covered with a super, super easy way to get leverage with B2X. And then on top of that, they know that Bitcoiners care about your reserves. They know that Bitcoiners don't like under reserved and not full reserved financial institutions. So they are pushing the frontier in transparency in the digital asset lending space. And they are the first digital asset lender to do a full proof of reserves and proof of attestation through a Mariano LLC, a public accounting firm. So the Ledn guys, they know what Bitcoiners like. They are legit. I encourage you guys to check them out. Do your own research and go to Ledn.io. That is LEDN.io and learn more. Bitcoiners, I want to tell you about the Deep Dive. The Deep Dive is Bitcoin Magazine's premium market intelligence newsletter. This is a no fluff, hard-hitting, incredible newsletter going deep into the market, helping you understand what's happening with derivatives, what's happening on-chain, what's happening in macro, what's happening with the narrative, and what's happening with the tech. My man, Dylan LeClaire, is an absolute savant. He is making his name known in the Bitcoin community, getting shout outs left and right, getting on podcasts left and right, and him and his team are bringing you everything that you need to know about Bitcoin. You don't even have to be on Bitcoin Twitter. You can ignore every other newsletter. This is the newsletter to rule them all. Go over to members.bitcoinmagazine.com, sign up today. And if you use promo code MACRO, you get a full month for free. You have nothing to lose. What are you waiting for? Sign up, see the incredible work that Dylan and his team are putting out. And if you don't like it, just unsubscribe. You don't pay a dime. But if you do, it's going to be well worth the sats in investment in understanding Bitcoin and gaining the confidence to continue to invest in Bitcoin and making the right moves around Bitcoin. And it's going to be well worth every single Satoshi. Again, can't recommend it enough. That is members.bitcoinmagazine.com, promo code MACRO. Do it today.
Just to follow up on what Ala was saying, in fact, it's the issue of Bitcoin has been, present in the public discourse among Palestinians. As recent as July of 2019, the Palestinian Prime Minister was saying that he is interested in moving towards using a digital currency to bypass Israeli regulations and to basically allow the Palestinian economy to be freer from Israeli restrictions. That obviously has not taken place, but beyond that, even I think as recent as several months ago, Hamas and their military wing, were asking for donations in the form of Bitcoin. And as recent as last week, Israel announced the confiscation of several Bitcoin wallets that belong to, according to the Israeli Defense Ministry, that belong to Hamas. And so that remains an issue. While yes, everybody is more or less convinced that using Bitcoin will be freer from the regulations of the different power bodies, whether it's Israelis or Palestinians or who else, Yet, because the internet source is controlled from one central authority, and that is the Israelis, who in essence end up giving the Palestinians certain frequencies that will enable internet to be present in Gaza or the West Bank, how does that affect the issue of anonymity and encryption when it comes to Bitcoin? Because we saw that clearly the Israelis can not only track who has a Bitcoin transaction inside the Palestinian territories, but they were able to confiscate some of these wallets. I don't know how exactly they did it, but I would be curious to get your
Fadi,
answers.
can you
Hey.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I tried to introduce you, and I guess I got cut off. The internet connection was shaky, but
Well, that's why I jumped in. We're waiting for you to come
thank you.
back.
So the point is, I'd love for you just to, like, you're an anti-corruption activist. Could you just introduce what you've been seeing in terms of the PA, and introduce people to, like, the fact that Abbas has been in power since 2006, basically kind of without elections in a way, and talk about maybe the recent protests and why, like, Palestinians cannot rely on their own government in the West Bank to really help them. Could you talk about that?
Sure. I was actually just getting into that. And so, I've been working on anti-corruption within the Palestinian Authority since 2011. And the biggest crisis today, which could prove helpful to people who are interested in Bitcoin, is the fact that many Palestinians do not have faith in the current Palestinian governing body, whether it's the president or the prime minister, mainly because of they've been in power since, especially the president has been in power since 2006, not allowing any forms of elections since then. Has basically alienated basically shut down the parliament, has installed his own legislative ruling, what do you call it? It's like a ruling body, a group of judges, that his own court, basically, that rules in his favor. He rules, the president rules by decree. And then on top of this whole entire shaky structure, you have a very corrupt system where basically if you want to open a business or you want to move money, whether in or out, you want to start a business or you want to shut down a business and move your money out, you can't really just do a regular, straightforward wire transfer without having to bribe somebody at the Palestine Monetary Authority or someone who's linked to somebody at the Palestine Monetary Authority. So the financial system, when it comes to the average citizen, very, very, very corrupt, not encouraging to engage. But then even higher, you've got the president who had the minister of finance. We have a minister of finance who's been there regardless of who's changed as prime minister. He was there since Salam Fayyad, then Rami Hamdallah became prime minister, and now Mohammed Shtaya. We've always had the same minister of finance, and it's for one reason and one reason only. He's a very sophisticated banker who worked at Arab Bank in France and in Geneva, and he is a sophisticated thief who helps the current president siphon off foreign aid money into special accounts that end up in the president's personal pocket. So you can see it's a very corrupt system dependent entirely on the
Fadi, can you give the tobacco example as like an example of how they run their business? Can you talk about that?
Sure. It's a system that entirely depends on one man and his interests, and that is the president. So this is a story that I've followed very closely. When the president's, there's a company, if you read Alex's article, there's a company called APEC, and APEC is a holding company through which the president and his family have interests in almost every kind of business that operates within the Palestinian territories. APEC also holds Philip Morris's licenses or importing licenses. And Philip Morris, if you know the tobacco products, they're kind of expensive. And so people who don't have the money and can't afford to buy Marlboros or any kind of Philip Morris products, they usually end up smoking local products, right? Locally made cigarettes that are made at a cheap discount, But because those people were competing with the Philip Morris imports, APEC and its chairman, along with Tariq Abbas, the son of the president, worked out a deal with the finance minister where they would levy a very heavy price on local products. Remember, on local products, not on imported products, where basically the tax would make it almost impossible for anybody locally to really go towards the local products, because the tax, I think it was like north of 20%. And the justification that they used for the Minister of Finance was that this would increase the revenue for the government's budget. Normal, right? Higher taxes means higher revenues for the government budget. And then no other consideration that this is a local business, that these are many families depend for their livelihoods on these businesses. These were all considerations that were thrown out. And that's what happened. So people, when they came to look at the price, if you want the local cigarettes, they're basically almost the same price as Philip Morris. So which product you're going to pick? You're going to go for the Philip Morris product. And that's how the president and his son, this is one simple example, how they were able to basically kill the local tobacco market. And they continue to do this through other things. There's the meat market, the supermarket, industry. And they use, because they have the different institutions that work, by a phone call or a text message or a wink. They use, for example, the tax collection authority to target you if you are going to be a competition to their holding company, right? If you decide that you're going to open a cigarette company or even a locally, now they use the mixed tobacco, fruit tobacco for the argila or shisha or whatever they call it. There are few other businesses that are popping up in Ramallah. These get raided. This is not in the article, but they get raided infrequently oh, you're not paying the right tax, oh, the health inspection, the this, the that. And the goal is to drive them out, right?
Did we lose Fadi?
Can you hear me?
No, I can hear him. I can hear him.
Yeah. And so I mean, the examples are plenty. You've got, there are many examples. But basically, the gist of it is, you have a very, very corrupt system, and the ones who are around it are clearly benefiting personally on the family level, on the personal level, and they're vested in protecting the system. But today, the biggest crisis with the Palestinian Authority is that it has no legitimacy. 80% of Palestinians in the West Bank believe that the Palestinian Authority is corrupt, versus 84% in Gaza who also believes that the Palestinian Authority is corrupt. So with that kind of lack of faith, create any type of change that could, put faith back into the system, if you keep the same people around. So my message has been that we have to have elections, we have to have reform within the Palestinian Authority, and the idea that the only alternative for the Palestinian Authority is Hamas is an idea that has been paddled and pushed by the Palestinian Authority, mainly by the corrupt individuals who do not want to be replaced, who do not want to lose out on this income generating business that they have secured. So they scare the international community and they say, look, if you do elections today, we will be voted out and only Hamas will be voted in. This is not true, by the way. Hamas is very unpopular in Gaza, and we have people in Gaza who could say how people are very unhappy with Hamas's rule for the past 15, 16 years. But not only this, there were almost 37 slates running for parliament in the Palestinian territories. 95% of people eligible to vote were registered to vote. Only 2 of the 37 slates for parliament where one was Fatah and one was Hamas. So it shows you the different mosaic, the different groups of people who are eager to jump in and have a voice and be part of the decision-making process. But because it's a monopoly run mainly by Abbas and company, it's making it impossible. So not to go away from the currency would be very appealing, because it would escape this kind of chaos and regulation and provision caused by the PA. I'll stop there, Alex.
And Fadi, one more thing. You mentioned to me that like it was very hard to pay people from abroad. I mean, can you go into a little bit about how difficult it is to pay, do business, move money from the US or Europe to Palestine?
Yeah, so absolutely. So it's hard for so many reasons, right? One, it's hard because, let's say, my issues has always been, if I send a wire transfer to pay a lawyer or something in the West Bank, they get interrogated by the Palestinian Authority, kind of like what Allah said. But in general, I think people are sort of scared. They don't want to send money. They don't want to invest in a headache because of the many regulations that could backfire. Like if you live in Europe or you live in the United States, the last thing that you want is to be questioned by the authorities over a trumped up charge or a trumped up story because because you're suspected of sending money to the wrong person. And sometimes it could be entirely fabricated, entirely made up by the Palestinian Authority because you're not paying the right bribe. I'll give you a specific example. The Palestinian Authority gets an allocated number of permits for Palestinian workers to go and work inside Israel. Part of this deal, the Palestinian Authority reaches out to the workers and says, we'll give you a permit, but in return, you have to pay us monthly amount, 1,500 shekels or 2,500 shekels to keep this permit working. And if you don't pay, do you know what they do? They'll write up a false report that you are a security threat, and they'll send that report to the Israeli intelligence that shuts down automatically your permit, where you're not allowed to go and work. Therefore, you're beholden to them. They use their perks with the Israeli intelligence to strengthen their hold on you to basically keep the corruption going. And so it's very risky because you could be hit in whichever way, regardless of your intentions, because they have the ability to manipulate whatever systems available to them to target you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I wanted to go to Kefa, who's joined us here. If you just want to come off mute and tell us about your thoughts about Bitcoin Kefa as possibly a parallel currency, and maybe tell people about some of the things you mentioned to me about how difficult it was, for example, to pay the people that you work with who are located in Gaza, etc. So let's see if we can get Kefa to join.
Hi.
Hey. Go ahead.
Do you want me to go ahead and talk? Because I was just listening, and then.
No, I'd really love for you to just talk about some of the issues with the money system and talk about why you are exploring Bitcoin as a possible alternative for Palestinian-owned businesses.
Basically, the idea came out because of the difficulty that I had, or our initiative had, in being sustainable and being able to pay teachers who work with us, and or people who we have people who write up like educational content and tech people, and transferring money over to them just became more ridiculous, because sometimes I would try. They now have Palestinian banks that are like in between the West Bank and Jerusalem, and so now it's easier to get to a Palestinian bank, but that does not necessarily guarantee that you can transfer money from Jerusalem to Gaza, or even transfer money from bank to bank, even though the banks are like literally right next to each other. Let me think. So basically, that's why also the fees, the commissions, going from bank to bank, being that I live, or anybody that lives in Jerusalem, you're also subject to the Israeli tax authority, and they can be very brutal, and they're constantly tracking how much money you are or are not making. And another leg of the occupation is basically taxation without representation. And So any type of undeclared, I mean, I've seen people being hauled in for undeclared income on very small amounts. And if you get on their records, and especially if you're a Palestinian and a Palestinian living in Jerusalem, you don't get off, and they will constantly hound you. So basically, I am still exploring this. I'm also an English teacher, and I'm still trying to understand how this would work, and how to build confidence in it. And honestly, and I'm going to throw this out there, I see it as the completion for BDS, and that we are able to empower our community within Palestine, and we could also stop using the Israeli shekel. And basically, everything that Fadi said before is basically true. So, I mean, this is something that we know, and I'm going to add to it, getting funding like for NGOs now is hard, or even getting licensing or to get registered as an NGO, because it's basically competition. To register as an NGO inside of Palestine, because the authority basically considers them competition for them, which is weird. And it's not a regulated authority. It's not, because Palestinians, it does attract a certain type, which would be because it does allow for corruption. Just adding to that, and I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, and do you just want to mention, you told me, even though you're somewhat privileged in as much as you said you have like dual citizenship or whatever, how hard it was or would be for you to send money to someone working for you in Gaza? Do you just want to explain the ridiculousness of how you would try to do that today? And then we could compare that to like maybe that person just downloading a Bitcoin wallet and receiving the money from you directly.
Okay, so basically, PayPal and like Stripe, they don't exist. So, okay, so let's use my model. So we're using an LMS, and people buy through the LMS, which is Learning Management System, and they're going to deposit, or the transaction is going to occur in one of the big platforms, which is basically Stripe or PayPal. Stripe or PayPal then goes to an American account. The American account, you can, the reason why it's deposited into an American account is because the business owner doesn't necessarily want to be on an Israeli radar. And because if they get on an Israeli radar, that's a whole different thing. And especially because they have dual citizenship and they live in Jerusalem, which automatically puts the apartheid red flags on your income. And so I'm sorry, I'm doing this step by step. Okay, so it's deposited in the American thing. You would go to an ATM. You would physically take out the money, take the physical money, and go to a Palestinian bank so that you can deposit it, and the person in Gaza can withdraw the money, and you can pay. Person can pay those people, can compensate those people for their services.
Yeah, I just thought that was incredible, because we're talking about, like, as the crow flies, not that far, and yet
no, it's only
yeah, the distance between Jerusalem and Gaza is not like a huge distance, and yet only like privileged relatively people who maybe have the ability to have like a Palestinian and an Israeli account can actually send money. I mean, otherwise you have to do it through Hawala or some other system. And today, as Fadi was saying, so many people have smartphones and they can just send Bitcoin. And then on the other side, there are people both in Gaza and in the West Bank. There are many ways to exchange Bitcoin for shekels if you need to. And it just seems like obviously a way that more and more people are going. I also wanted to go back to Allah for a second, as to like most people don't realize there's no like Amazon in the West Bank. Allah, do you just want to talk a little bit about like that experience and how, how the lack of just like international markets affects people?
Yeah, absolutely. I would be glad to talk about it. So I remember when I was in Palestine, I was using, for example, AliExpress to search for some products. But because we don't have a direct border, direct import, we have to use Israel as the country, and everything has to come to Israel first. Then if they clear the taxes and everything is good and they didn't tax something, or you need, for example, a special permit from the ministry, and in the end, it will arrive to you. But for example, Amazon for Palestinian is not existent. You can only maybe buy some books, if I remember correctly. But you can't buy goods normally from Amazon or from other companies that ships online to the worldwide, because maybe Palestine is not listed as a country, so you can't choose it physically, or because even if you choose Israel, maybe there's some limitations if you use the city of the Palestine, West Bank or Gaza. The other problem is we don't have zip codes for the cities, so even if you try to digit your address, you can't get it correctly. So it's something that it's really, I don't know. When I come to Europe, when I start to buy from Amazon, or when I started my online banking, it's like I have discovered it for the first time. We are deprived from a lot of things, from a lot of features, from a lot of facilities to use, to buy, to send money. For example, there's a lot of Palestinians who have money, who have banks account, but it's not common for us to send bank transfers or to use the banks to send bank transfers, because 3 months ago, I tried to set up from the bank of my brother. He has an account in a Palestinian bank. So he go to his online banking and he wanted, for example, to put my IBAN and send me some money. So when he started the process to choose the country, to choose the IBAN, to choose the SWIFT code, then there's something to select, which is what is your relation to this person. And there was only father, mother, brother, or something like this. So even if you want to send a bank transfer, for example, to a company or to an exchange like a Kraken, for example, you can't choose it because you are limited to who you can send the bank, who can send the money. And the funny thing is that even after you fill up all the details, you have to send it for approval. So the information have to go to the bank, and the bank have to send the information to the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and they will review it. And of course, they will decline it because it's not a blood relative, or they will make some excuses. So people tend to use cash more in Palestine.
There's one other point. May I add this point, Alex? The advantage of Bitcoin is being anonymous and being able to send and receive money anonymously. This advantage does not exist now. I can basically, anyone that has a bank account in any of the Palestinian banks could make, and if you know someone within the world of Palestinian intelligence, you could make one phone call. They'll make a phone call to any worker in any bank, and they'll give you full details of their bank account, how much money they have, how long they've had it, who they got it from. I mean, full. It's not like bank secrecy laws that are wholly like exist in the United States. Your bank account, almost anybody and everybody can find out any piece of information they want about that account, whether you know it or not. And so that's a huge point, by the way, when you compare the currently existing system compared to Bitcoin.
Bitcoiners, let's take a break from the content, and I want to tell you about Coolbix. Coolbix is an awesome Bitcoin hardware wallet that's been around for a really long time. They are building an amazing Bitcoin wallet called the Cool Wallet Pro. The Cool Wallet Pro is state-of-the-art Bitcoin hardware wallet technology. Its form factor is like a credit card. You can put it into your wallet, and it is designed to go with you on the go. So that way, even when you're on the go, you can have the benefit of a two-factor hardware wallet design when you're trying to spend your Bitcoin. So you can have your Bitcoin wallet UX on your phone and make it really easy to scan, decide what you want to do, but then you sign with a CoolBitX, which is in your back pocket. It is tamper proof. It is waterproof. It is flexible. It has an awesome secure element in it. And it is a really awesome way in order to have some more flexibility, yet security when you're taking your Bitcoin on the go. I personally am a fan of, this idea of making Bitcoin into a medium of exchange and making it into something that people use. I know it's going to take time, but they are working on the UX for making that possible in as secure a way possible. So have some peace of mind. Check out the Cool Wallet Pro from CoolBitX. And yeah, thank you to them for sponsoring this podcast. Bitcoiners, I am so excited to tell you about the Bitcoin 2022 conference. You guys, Bitcoin 2021 was absolutely a smash hit success. It was over 13,000 Bitcoiners coming together, breaking the barriers on who can come together and celebrate freedom, celebrate Bitcoin, and the energy was absolutely electric. Unfortunately, it was just oversubscribed. There's just people flowing out everywhere. And this year we are learning, we are making the conference bigger and better. We are moving over to the Miami Beach Convention Center, and we are going to be throwing a massive 4-day festival for Bitcoin, celebrating Bitcoin, bringing together the greatest minds in Bitcoin and the greatest businesses in Bitcoin. And lastly, the culture of Bitcoin all together. We have a 4-day extravaganza planned for you guys for Bitcoin 2022. Day one is going to be Industry Day. It is a day where you can buy a special ticket in order to just mingle and make business deals happen. Day 2 and 3 is going to be a full-blown Bitcoin conference. This is our main conference. This is going to be on April 7th and 8th. And then lastly, we have the Sound Music Festival, Day 4. Imagine going to Coachella, but for Bitcoin. There's going to be very few talks. It's going to be all about the culture of Bitcoin. It's going to be all about hanging with your fellow plebs. It is going to be an absolutely amazing time. There's going to be Bitcoin musicians, Bitcoin artists, and all your favorite Bitcoiners, and just an amazing environment to party and just see it all, soak it all in, and to get people to realize that a Bitcoin world, a world filled with Bitcoin people doing Bitcoin things, is the world that they want to live in. That's what Bitcoin 2022 is all about. That is what the Bitcoin conference is all about. That's what Bitcoin Magazine is all about. So it is going to be a celebration of Bitcoin, the Bitcoiners, and this amazing movement that is going to make the world a better place. Go to b.tc/conference, learn more about the Bitcoin conference, learn more about all the amazing things that are happening in Miami around the Bitcoin conference, and buy your tickets. And guess what? If you buy your tickets with Bitcoin, you save $100 on all the tickets and $1,000 on the whale pass. So if you want the VIP pass, the big kahuna, if you buy with Bitcoin, you save $1,000. That's a lot of sats. So go and do it right now today. Don't wait. Prices are only going up. This is going to be a can't miss event.
I wanted to touch on 2 more themes and then just open it up to the folks on stage here. First of all, I think it's interesting to think about from a broader perspective, foreign aid, and how, think about this. When Canada or Japan or the United States gives yen or Canadian dollars or dollars to the Palestinians through Israel, which of course is like a really important revenue stream for the PA and for the Palestinian people in general. It's a very non-trivial percentage of GDP. It's gone down recently, but let's say over the last 20 years, it's been as high as 1/3 of the revenue that the PA has as foreign aid. Think about this. The aid is not gifted in shekels. It's gifted in some other foreign currency. And the Central Bank of Israel is actually able to take that, okay, and then put that into their reserve and replenish and deal with balance of payments issues, or even just save it to strengthen the shekel. And then they can credit the PA once a month with the aid in shekels that they can print essentially or create through their own correspondent banks. So this is one of the reasons why over the last 20 years, the shekel has appreciated against the dollar by 25%. It's one of the world's strongest currencies. And one of the reasons why is because they get this sort of additional inflow of foreign hard currency, not just through the US government, which gives $3+ billion a year to Israel which, by the way, used to finance the entire occupation, from soup to nuts. But and that comes in dollars, of course. And that's not like in return for production of goods. That's just aid. Like Palestinians are very per capita income, or rather per capita. They are more reliant on aid than almost anyone else. But Israelis actually get more aid per capita than Palestinians. I thought that was a very interesting fact. But essentially, Israel gets all this foreign currency, which it's able to strengthen and prop up its own shekel with. And one of the more interesting theories I came across, I have no idea whether you all think it's true or not, was that obviously we had a big fight between Hamas and the IDF in 2008-9. One of the theories was that one of the reasons why the Israelis did it was to actually destroy the tunnel economy that Hamas had built to do trade with Egypt through Egypt, because they were worried about shekels, which were being paid to PA workers still living in Gaza, leaking out into the Egyptian economy, thus having like an outflow of their own currency. Whereas without the tunnels, they could like kind of control and keep all the shekels inside. And they were worried about this actually like drawing the reserves down. I thought this was a fascinating idea. So in general, I think this idea of like foreign aid and how Israel benefits almost off of the occupation is an interesting concept. And then the other one, just to explore, and we can throw it out to you all after this, is this idea of confiscation. I mean, obviously, throughout history, so Saifeddin has joined us. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this idea of like how the inflow of hard currencies abroad like benefits the Israelis. There's not a lot of content on this, but I just wondered if you've ever thought about it before, and just if you have any reflections on that.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing this, Alex. It's really great. I've been enjoying listening so far. I'll say, I've been trying to, for a while now, try and get people in Palestine, Ramallah mainly, where my family is, to get on Bitcoin, and and I can relate to a lot of what Fadi was discussing in terms of just how difficult things are, and the Palestinian Monetary Authority is being extremely negative on this primarily because the people in that job are in that job because they're supposed to be doing Israel's bidding in terms of enforcing sanctions and not letting, watching for all kinds of illicit funding. So their directive is to just avoid anything that could potentially cause them any problems. And so therefore they won't let you send any money to any Bitcoin exchange. And they're pretty hostile to any idea. I had an idea. You may know Azteco, the company that is founded by a Beauty On, who's on Twitter, and it's a company where you can. It's a very neat model for selling Bitcoin through retailers. Any retailer can do it, where you just you tell them the quantity that you want to buy in terms of cash. So you tell them, I want to buy $100 of Bitcoin. You give them $100. All they do is that they go log on to their portal and they give you a voucher code. And then you take that voucher code and you log on to Azteco. And then Azteco will send you the Bitcoins to your address. You give them your address and the voucher code and they'll send you the Bitcoin. So it's a very neat way of getting people into Bitcoin without having to involve banks. And it would, you could do it without banks if you have some kind of liquidity. We're able to settle with the retailers. And I tried to do something like this with exchange shops, but it was extremely impossible to get anybody to want to play along because everybody suspects that if they do something like this, they'll get into trouble with the Palestinian Monetary Authority. And the Palestinian Monetary Authority is very adamant that they don't want to allow something like this because they're afraid that it might be used for terrorist financing. So, I mean, as anybody who knows me will know that I think Bitcoin fixes everything. The tricky part in Palestine is getting the Bitcoin there and getting people to want to get on board Bitcoin. It's very powerful once they use it because it allows you to get around all of these restrictions that we were mentioning. and it's it appreciates, and that's something that people need. But getting it there is the tricky part. I'd love to hear any ideas anybody here has on what can be done about this.
Yeah,
Well,
Noor, go ahead.
yeah, well, for sure, one of the ways that could be facilitated is through the diaspora, right? We all send money to our families there, and there needs to be an awareness or an awakening for people who are abroad, to understand the power that Bitcoin could have on their families, on their livelihood, on their savings, and everything around them, to start, at least mentioning the idea, or at least considering the idea as a viable one. Because we're abroad struggling as well to send money to our families there, and it's not something that is easy. It's not something that we can fix, and it's not, no matter how many campaigns we do, that's not gonna bring any concrete solutions. And as you said, we're blocked in every shape and form, right? Like even the sea in Gaza is now blocked. The parameter in which the Gazans can fish is reduced. So that's one way to go about it, and I'm happy to open the floor to anybody else who has to contribute with this.
Well, one thing I thought that was remarkable is in speaking to one of the guys I profiled is lives in Rafah in Gaza, and he basically was saying that Bitcoin has penetrated, and that he's been saving up for a couple of years in Bitcoin, and there is like a level of awareness and usage. I guess if we look at the world level of awareness and usage, and that it's probably around 200 million people, maybe 2%, it's probably either not that different, or probably even less so in Palestine, right? So we're still very early, but it's remarkable that it's going to be hard, especially because people are like distrustful of anything new in finance. I understand that. And they distrust authorities generally, and they distrust anything new, which is fair if you're Palestinian, for sure. But I think it's kind of unstoppable. It's just a matter of like, I think just talking about it. And what's interesting that I kind of realized in doing this research was that the existing international dialogue about helping Palestinians is completely clueless about Bitcoin, and this is to their great detriment. And you look at otherwise very detail-oriented, helpful organizations like there's a very prominent Israeli civil liberties group that fights for Palestinian rights, B'Tselem, etc. There are a few others as well. And you look at their website, I mean, even the main economic think tank in Palestine, actually, zero mentions of Bitcoin. So it's not even that they're necessarily against it. It's just that they don't know about it, or that they're willfully ignorant or genuinely ignorant about it, right? So this extends to abroad too, and to literally anyone who's like, putting free Palestine on Twitter as a hashtag. What's happened is that like there's this virtue signaling advocacy here that doesn't really do a whole lot. And the one thing that actually could make a difference is being kind of ignored. So that's, I feel like, something where we could make a dent in, is trying to like have a dialogue with the broader community, and trying to get them to be aware of this very effective tool. How can they ignore it if an increasingly large number of Palestinians every day are using it, would be my general thought. So yeah, I don't know if Fadi or Ella or Kefa have thought.
So I can add something. So, like you said, it's the ignorance, let's say, and non-trust of the West, which is, as Palestinian, I can say that we trustless. We hope we lost hope in the world, because we have depended in the war to help us fight for our freedom, to get our freedom. So everything that comes from the West, it's less likely to interest us, because we feel that we are down from the world. So I think that the thing is, we can help our brothers in Palestine adopting Bitcoin by, for example, set up your wallet. I may send you, I don't know, some Satoshis for the start. Then they will become more interested, and people start to send some satoshis from one wallet to another, and see that using Lightning Network, for example, which has almost zero cost, and it's very fast to send and receive Bitcoin. So I think it's the way, because using the banks for sending money is really hard, and like I said before, everything is watched by the Palestinian Authority and so by the Israelis. So we have to get away from the authority and be anonymous about this. So we have to start using Bitcoin more, and for the daily using, because there's a lot of Palestinians who use cash because they don't trust banks and they don't trust the authority. So I think it's good for them and easy for them to exchange cash for Bitcoin from one to another without using banks. So this will help a lot, I think, especially if people see Bitcoin like an investment in the future and for finding money for the future or for their children, for example. So yeah, it can help a lot.
Yeah, one thing just worth underlining is that what we would probably fear is the introduction of a central bank digital currency in the Palestinian territories, because again, as Allah has said and others have said, the informal sector is so important in Palestine. Like cash is so important. Where they basically have no freedoms or very little freedoms, at least cash gives you an ability to transact and save outside of the control of the government. Now, it's not perfect because you're still using the Israeli currency, and in the 80s, that was obviously a disaster, and in the future, it could be rough as well. And you're still subject to demonetization, etc. But in general, like cash does give Palestinians some level of freedom. And if we're talking about the World Bank coming in and trying to, like, quote unquote, help Palestinians by introducing a central bank digital currency, which would completely remove that ability of freedom to freely transact and save, removing the very tiny freedom that they already have and replacing it with something that can be a mechanism of control between whether it be the Israelis or the corrupt PA, that's very concerning to me. And that's why it's actually quite incredible to see Palestinians use Bitcoin. And I think it's something that can actually help where everything else, maybe failed. And another thing to remember is that, again, this is a history of confiscation. Like Palestinians have been subject to a policy of, like, essentially confiscating the most arable and productive land and services, and they've been discouraged from producing, and actually their ability to produce and to manufacture and to farm has been systematically eliminated long before today. Like, this was done in the 70s and 80s, and they become very reliant on the outside world, first for labor in Israel, but also goods and services, and then finally on foreign aid. And they don't have an ability to be sovereign. For people who are new to the chat here, as we covered earlier, like, as part of the Oslo process, which everybody has hailed as like this positive thing for peace, in reality, what happened was a sacrifice where they, through this Paris Protocol, they traded off their monetary freedoms and basically agreed that they'd never have their own currency, in exchange for this, like, sort of political autonomy, which then Yasser Arafat and his cronies used to sort of get fat and be corrupt. And any sort of chance for, like, an independent Palestine state that could, again, be productive with business and entrepreneurship and grow capital stock, was kind of traded off. So now today we stand at a moment where, like, very little works. Everything's been tried, but today the future looks less exciting than the present for the average Palestinian. And what can we even, there's not a lot to be said for success here. Like, everybody's complicit, whether it be the World Bank or the IMF or the Americans or the Israelis or the PA themselves, like, or Hamas. Like, nobody's helping the average Palestinian, except maybe for Bitcoin. So it's, like, really kind of a crazy thing, but it is something that can actually help someone, actually help folks. So go ahead.
I agree with you, Alex, but I would say pay attention to Gaza. I think Bitcoin will be more popular, more dominant in Gaza, mainly because of the restrictions. I already, people in Gaza look at Bitcoin almost like this way we would look at the stock market. If you have cash and you want to invest that cash into some sort of return, there are already shops in Gaza that will take your cash, convert that cash into some sort of a basket of currencies, cryptocurrencies, and that's your sort of like stock portfolio. That already exists in Gaza, and the reason why, like you mentioned earlier, the tunnels, and the reason why Israel wanted to cut the tunnels off, it is an economic, um, an economic hole for the Israelis that they cannot control. It's bringing in millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, and that money has to go somewhere. So many people who either have made money through the tunnels or other forms of, business, are moving more and more towards investing in a cryptocurrency basket, crypto or Bitcoin basket, via some of the shops that are existing, and mainly in Gaza. I haven't seen anything like this in the West Bank. It might already exist, but I haven't heard anything about it. But in Gaza, it does. So I think, pay close attention to Bitcoin in Gaza, and you'll see, because of the restrictions, because of the the siege that is on their economic and otherwise, people will have to find ways, and I think they've already found their way in Bitcoin.
One thing that's interesting as well that I've learned is that I would say that most Israeli Bitcoiners that I've spoken to would be very sympathetic, and they want to help Palestinians use Bitcoin, and they think that'll be a helpful collaborative thing to work on. And one of them told me, as I mentioned in the article, that like, hey, this is a chance to give real freedom as opposed to the fake freedom that we've been trying to give out for so many years. Like, this is a way to actually help people become sovereign. So I think there's a chance here to get some cooperation going on this issue of like expansion of a Bitcoin economy. But you have to realize, as Fadi has been hinting at, that the Israeli government and the IDF and the Israeli Ministry of Finance, etc., like they will definitely demonize Bitcoin, and they will call it a tool for bad actors. So I think we have to be aware. We have to be aware of that as well. I don't know if anyone else wants to reflect on that.
If I can add something up. So we were trying to say, how can we help Palestinians? Like if I said, which work with NGOs. So if you want to start an NGO, or you want to say make something in Palestine, you have to have one person inside your administrative of the NGO. It has to be in the Palestinian Authority, or you will not get permit to make it. They have to have control of the NGO and the money that comes to the NGO. So doing NGOs basically helps the Palestinian Authority. They have full control, and they will take a share of all the money that comes from outside the world. So this is why we only have Bitcoin to cut that out, cut the Palestinian Authority out of it, because helping Palestinians either with NGOs or with other forms of solidarity will give share to Palestinian Authority and share the Israel, of course, because they will collect taxes even if the products you import or export. So yeah, I think Bitcoin is the only way, and we have to push in that way, maybe to help Palestinians create their wallets on their phones, because everybody has a smartphone in Palestine. I believe that more than 70% have smartphones in Palestine, so it's easy to get them do it. They don't know how. This is the only way. Maybe we can write articles in Arabic, or we can make videos on YouTube or something like that.
That's a very good point, Ala. So there is a huge initiative that is being undertaken primarily by Arabic Huddle, who's part of the audience right now, to translate a lot of the most important or most impactful pieces about Bitcoin over the past 10 years. We've started gathering a big community that is building up right now of volunteer translators. Obviously, one of the problems that we have with the translation in the Arab world is the fact that English literacy is very low. We see that impact with the Arabic content on Wikipedia, for instance, which is one of the Arabic is one of the lowest languages available there. and it's no different than Bitcoin. And part of the reason why is because a lot of these work is volunteer based, right? A lot of the translation work is volunteer based. It's been hit so hard over the past 10 years, be it war or other reasons. We can't, in good consciousness, ask them to work for free. And so for us living abroad, we've been trying to mobilize to support that effort through creating working groups and collaborating together, especially for big pieces like the ones that Alex writes, to get content out as fast as possible. As a matter of fact, this particular article is already there in Arabic. We're just waiting for the review to be done to release it soon. And there is an effort being made to reflect on some of the concrete initiatives we can do to support Palestinians, but also because a lot of the problems are quite similar, right, across the Arab world, but it's particularly dire in Palestine for sure. But we are forming a working group to reflect on that and to find solutions together. So if you want to help with the reflection, please reach out to me or to Arabic. And if you want to support by donation, he also set up an address on the website to donate as well. So that's also available.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Alex to weigh in here, but just real quick. Blue Wallet is a great wallet to talk to people about, as it's Arabic language right-left support. And I've also talked to the Moon Wallet team, and maybe we can get in the future Arabic support for that wallet, which I think would be great. Alex, do you have a question?
Yeah, it wasn't so much a question. I was just gonna mention just a couple of anecdotal things, which is like I just landed in the US and I was in Salvador for a week with a whole little Bitcoin crew, and just a couple of things I just wanted to throw out there was experience there, but also experience in Eastern Europe. So my parents are from Macedonia, which is also, a disaster of a country, broken through communism, yada, yada, yada. And, I spent some time there last year, and, obviously this recent Salvador visit, just getting a lay of the land of how people perceive and understand Bitcoin in these regions. And, I've kind of been forming both potential risks in my head, but then also potential, angles. And if I had to try and distill a method of bringing Bitcoin into these regions, and what to sort of be aware of is, I guess, if I start with the risk side, it's very easy for people in these regions who already have a little bit of a distaste for, I guess, quote unquote, the West, but it's very, very easy for them to get caught up in scams. Like I saw it while we're in Salvador, for example, there was a bunch of shitcoiners there trying to get people onto other coins as like a faster way to make payment. And luckily, what you've got, particularly in Zonte, is that there's a good core community of trusted, I guess, individuals or trusted leaders in the communities that understand the nuance and understand Bitcoin and actually act as almost figureheads. And I think this is the thing about these emerging nations, is that the leverage point becomes people who already have an established level of, trust within their communities. They're the people that we need to target, and they're the people that we need to get these pieces, like Noor was just mentioning, being translated in front of people. So, I've had a bunch of my stuff translated into Spanish, and that's sort of helped. Like I always get messages from people in whether it's Mexico or here or there saying, can we use your stuff to like speak to these communities? I'm like, fuck yes, please go ahead, like go and do that. But I think we need to find leverage points, basically leaders in communities that act as almost ambassadors, because when it comes to money, and I don't care whether you're at the top of the economic ladder or the very bottom, people don't make decisions logically initially, they make decisions emotionally. Like if I was building a product and the product involved throwing bags of shit on someone, and I said A16Z, like Andreessen Horowitz is the lead investor, everyone would invest. They wouldn't even look at the fucking product, right? And even down to the bottom layer of society, which is people, with $50 in savings, they generally, before they make a logical decision, they'll make an emotional decision. And that's where that, community leverage point needs to happen. So anyway, I was just going to say that from an anecdotal perspective, because I had some success in Macedonia where when I was there, I went straight to some particular community leaders and managed to get people into a room and present the Bitcoin case. And then we're seeing that sort of in Salvador as well.
Yeah, no. So maybe, I don't know if Safety, you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say with regards to what Noor was saying in translations, I've set up a page, safeddin.com/Arabic, but I've not had a lot of luck promoting it. It's got the full translation of my book, but also translation of about 7-8 articles into Arabic. Some are just basic technical articles. What is a wallet? How to set up a wallet? How to store Bitcoin? How to buy Bitcoin? The basics of the operational sense of Bitcoin, and then a couple of articles on, by Parker Lewis and VJ, which in the bullish case for Bitcoin by VJ Boyapati, and then a couple of articles from Parker Lewis, which I think are very important. So these are all available on my website, and I got sponsorship from a Bahraini exchange, Rain Financial, to get a professional translator to do them all. And I urge everybody here to share them with any Arabic speakers you know. They have they're very practical and useful, and I'd appreciate getting them out there as much as possible. And also, I can hopefully work on making more of those things by getting sponsorship from exchanges. I think anybody listening, this is probably a good place to finance your work. There are three Arabic exchanges: Bit Oasis in Dubai, and there's Rain in Bahrain, and there's Coin Mina in Bahrain as well. They might be interested in sponsoring efforts to produce Arabic content. So I think this could be useful for people looking into this.
Awesome, thank you.
Sorry, but just one quick thing. Safe, or anybody else that wants to promote things in Arabic, especially within Palestine. I have my Facebook page has millions of Palestinians that follow it, and we've got other pages where we could pretty much make sure that the whole country sees whichever content that we want to push out. So if you have specific things that you think it's important for the general population to see, feel free to share them with me, and I'm happy to help spread them, obviously within our reach.
Great. Yeah, I'll definitely send you these.
Last thing, we're going to wrap up soon, but Kefa, you told me that when we talked that independence was financial, and that you felt like any sort of effort to help the Palestinian people without this in mind was ultimately going to be a failure. Do you just want to comment on that for maybe a second? I thought that was particularly poignant.
In that, like, for full independence, yeah, it has to be 300% economic, and I know it's going to have to be baby steps. And actually, I've been following the conversation. I'm seeing that there's a lot of confidence that has to be built, and I'm trying to think how to do that, because I live there, and you're basically moving people from hard cash. I mean, these are people who still buy gold to save their money. Like, people buy like different types of gold and hide it under their mattress. And you're trying to get that confidence where they can go to something that's totally ether. And I also see an S-curve jump. I do believe that there has to be pockets of success and continuity for the transition to be made. But what was the second part of your question, Alex? Just so I
No,
answer
just
right.
just this general idea that, like, Oslo was a process of independence without financial freedom, right? And that did not turn out well.
Oh no, that was not. That was something else. I mean, this is probably my American side playing into it. I just felt like it was the building of the welfare system, another like internationalized welfare system that we have here in the U.S. And the other thing is that there was no private sector to absorb, like hospital talking points is that we what was it? Oh, we embezzled all the money. We didn't. You can't embezzle that much money. You can only get away with so much. There was really no way to absorb the money or for the money to be dispersed well. And so I see Bitcoin as helping. The private sector is hugely important. And we'll see this in other civil rights movements or liberation movements, and that they always build their private sector. And then, with money comes also political empowerment. So when we start having more money in our hands that is produced by us and not given to us, unconditionally given to us, I definitely see empowerment. The S curve jump, I have no idea how it's going to happen. Because like what I'm seeing now is like, I don't know, I'm older, this is probably bigger. It's like, I'm seeing like the beginning of like the internet, like when people thought it was just a fad. And I'm just trying to figure out how that would, what's going to make it more solid. And this is, and I do believe we do need those small little, initiatives and just building confidence.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think the vision that some have painted and told me is that they have this idea of almost like the adoption of a circular economy, where over time Palestinian-owned businesses and whether they be in Israel or the West Bank or Gaza, like would start at least accepting Bitcoin, knowing about Bitcoin, being willing to take the Bitcoin if you want to pay with it, as both a. What's interesting is it would be like a political act of, you might want to call it resistance or freedom or sovereignty, but also it's an economic act in self-interest over time. Like if the Palestinians can't have their own currency, and we obviously here, especially given what Fadi said, we have no confidence PA would be like a responsible central bank for sure. But they continue to be reliant on the shekel. Well, what if the currency that they choose to adopt like absolutely crushes the shekel over the next 10, 20 years? I mean, it certainly has in the last 10 years. So, the question is, what happens then? And that's a door that we should explore. So I really want to thank everybody for coming today. It's been really interesting to hear from everyone. Fadi, thank you. Noor, thank you. Allah, thank you. Kefa, thank you. Thank you very much, Safedine, for joining as well. The article is up on Bitcoin Magazine. Obviously, you heard it's been translated into Arabic. That'll be available soon. We'll all be sharing that. And we can keep this conversation going. Thanks so much to the hosts at Bitcoin Magazine. Thank you, CK.
Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you, Bitcoin Magazine. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And like Alex said, you can find this as well as all the other work that Alex is doing on Bitcoin Magazine. Go to his author page. So many fantastic pieces diving into the petrodollar system, the CFA franc system, uncovering how the fiat system works. And
Cuba's next. Cuba's next, folks.
Yeah, and how Bitcoin makes a fair system. But again, thank you everyone who listened. Thank you for the support, and see you next time.
See you later.
Thank you very much.